I'm very at home at this spot on the stage. I've done thousands of gigs here with a few different guitars. This is a fairly new one for me. I got it about a year ago and had it here last year. It's from a company called B&G, in case anybody should ask. And it reminds me of every good guitar I ever had. It has a real woody sound. That it reminds me of a big arch top that I used to have in the 1970s. And it also will really scream and screech like a Fender guitar too, or be very full like a Les Paul. It will do just about everything, and I've been happy with it, especially because it plays easier than any guitar I've ever had. Should I just pass the guitar around and everybody can play it through it? I wish we had an easier way to do this. I wish for those of you who wanted to play along, there was a way to string outlets and amps all along the Rum Boogie, but we'll kind of have to do it with in like lecture form. That can kind of set the direction for where we go. In 1975, I'd been in Muddy Waters Band for a couple of years, and I went back to the place where I was brought up in Brookline, Massachusetts, and my parents were still around then, and they had a condominium in Brookline. And I was visiting, and I went up the street to a drugstore to pick up some road supplies, deodorant, toothpaste, things like that. And the young man came up to me in the drugstore and said, "Hi, Bob. I've seen you play a lot. I really like your music. I have a band and we're on a break from rehearsal up the street. Want to come see us play?" So I did. And the young man sounded pretty good. And his name was Ronnie Earl. He dropped his last name and just had his first two names to use professionally after that. But he was in college at the time at Boston University, and he said, "You know what, tomorrow, you're not going to believe this, but B.B. King is coming to Boston University with his rhythm section, piano, bass, and drums, and is going to do a workshop." And I said, "Well, gee, I'd like to see that too." By that time, I'd through Muddy's band, and actually one time when I went to see BB when I was 20, and he invited anybody to sit in, and I levitated onto that bandstand and played his guitar when I was 20 years old. I do have a young man in the house that I play with a lot in North Carolina, where I live now, and I'm going to bring him up here to show you how the two guitars can go together a little bit. But the opportunity for me, I had fallen in love with Muddy Waters and Chicago blues and his music, and I'd been in bands that opened for Muddy, and I was just smart enough not to play Muddy Waters songs on a Muddy Waters show, just barely. In high school, well, we didn't do that. The Kingsmen that did Louie Louie played at our high school, and so did my opening band. But, not a good move. But I was smart enough not to do that when Muddy was around, but he could see that I was trying to play what he called old school Chicago blues, which would be with a style that he was kind of the king of. And I had this incredible opportunity to not just have a workshop with Muddy Waters, but to actually get to be in his band. One time he came into town and he had just fired somebody, and I was the next one he saw, and he knew how much I loved the music. He gave me a chance to put me on the road that I still ride. And while I was there, he very deliberately put me on his right side so I could watch him play. I was here, Muddy was here playing, and I could watch what he did and try to learn from it. I watched his right hand to see what his touch was. His touch was very percussive. He had learned to play in Mississippi on acoustic guitars, and very soon after I was in the band, he told me I was playing too slow, which really surprised me. I didn't think that he wanted me to play too many notes or play like a blues rocker or anything. I wasn't trying to. He did not mean that I was playing too slow in that I wasn't playing speedy enough licks. He meant the way I got in and out of every note instead of play. He would want it to swing, and he told me, take the heel of your hand and pop it down on the bridge after every note. And that little difference between and that made all the difference in the world to him. And believe me, I didn't want to get fired. I knew what opportunity I had because I was getting live lessons on a bandstand from Muddy Waters, and he was paying me. That's the punchline of the story right there. Just for what it's worth, in the 1970s, for me and most of the rest of the band, it came out to about $16,000 a year. But that was enough to live on for me when I didn't have, I didn't really have a house. I had a suitcase and a guitar and an amp and was on the road with them and just had a wonderful time. I'd go visit my folks or somebody that I was seeing when I was off the road, but I didn't even have a car then. I just would go out on the road with the band and play. It was quite a lifestyle in the 1970s too. But I'll tell you what, one thing that I did try to learn from him was Muddy's slide guitar style. And I really loved playing that style. This is Tad Walters, and he's in town here. And we're doing F, right? Now, here's another thing for Muddy. It's not that he was not smart enough to do barred chords, he just didn't want to play that way. If he played in the key of G, he would put he had one of the elastic ones back then, and he would call it a clamp, not a capo. But this one really clamps. That would be for key of G. If I was going to do for the key of F, which I'm doing completely for Tad, because he's kind of downsizing his equipment, and an A harp to play an F was too much. Don't tell Bob Cortor we did this, okay? And excuse me?
Your secret is safe.
I trust you, man. I've got just a little distortion on here. Something else you'll notice. No pedals. Now, pedals are a big deal. I can't recall seeing very many blues guitar players these days that don't have a floor full of pedals in front of them. And I listen to them, and I'm not going to put them down. They sound pretty good. People know how to use them. Some people overuse them. Some people get such a distorted sound that there's no clarity, that you lose the personality of the guitar. But others don't. The real good ones don't. So I have nothing against it. I just don't use them. Now, we're in the key of F here. But you hear how that guitar sounds kind of wooden? If you close your eyes, that might have been like an archtop guitar. But I've got a little bit of distortion on it. Just by turning the amp up. I didn't use the drive channel in this, what do they call that, a deluxe? Yeah, I guess it's a Hot Rod Deluxe or something like that I'm playing too, which is kind of a standard amp for backlines these days. I really like the little 20-watt Fender Deluxe Reverb reissues. They're excellent amp. You hear all the harmonics in that, just like all those. It's pretty. I really don't want a pedal, but I don't mind if you use one. Gonna keep on sailing till you lose your happy home. Notice how on them changes I made them real snappy. Sail on, my little honeybee, sail on. How I hit some of the licks in different parts of the neck. It sounds different when I play up here compared to there without even changing pickups. I don't mind you sailing, but please don't sail so long. Now I'm going to back up tad. Tad Walters on the harmonica. Come along with me, man. Playing electric guitar, he'd make a statement like that on his first solo, and on the second one, while he was doing a turnaround like this and building it up, and he would put on his treble pickup and then really drive it home. she's coming back home to me. Pull this off my finger. No. That hasn't worked on him. I don't think it ever worked on him even when he was 17. He's about 20 now. Anyway, when I bring my own band out, which unfortunately is not that much these days, I end up going being a guest with different people, which has its advantages and disadvantages. I have a lot of frequent flyer miles, and my soccer mom minivan doesn't put that many miles on it each year. But we have done probably thousands of gigs together. Guitar playing for Chicago blues, which came out of Mississippi and cities like this one here and streets like this one here, is very collaborative. You don't play rhythm and lead. It's the two guitar parts just go together. When one person goes high, the other one goes low. It was not. You don't have to keep it one person just doing the lead and the fills through the whole song. They use bass lines a lot, and sometimes they use them instead of just going in different directions, and the two can cross paths, and you can't tell who's playing what anymore. And that was deliberate too. Jimmy Rogers, who was the second guitar player in Muddy's original band in the early 1950s, told me that Muddy and Jimmy Rogers and Little Walter used to ride around after the gigs and try and plot ways that they could stay ahead of all the other great blues bands that were playing, like some of the people I mentioned. They were up against Howlin' Wolf, and they were up against... Alfonso, what do you think of Howlin' Wolf? It's a young man right here who channels him sometimes.
The best. Oh, man. Oh, yeah.
That's good. I never saw Wolf as dressed up as you, though. You were looking good today, man. But they used to plot how to stay ahead of them, and they used to figure out how they would put their two guitar and harp parts together, and Tad does that really, really well. Plus, he can swing a bass line, very, very influenced by Robert Lockwood Jr. Tad got to be a friend of his and really studied his playing well. Muddy and Jimmy Rogers actually had a term for that kind of guitar playing. They call it filling in the cracks. I noticed that the Rolling Stones did that too, but with not just when they played blues songs, but with rock music. And when I read Keith Richards' autobiography a few years ago, I read that he said it was very deliberate too, and they had a different term for it. And I think it's just as good as filling in the cracks. They called it guitar weaving. And they kind of, when the two guitars would go together, I'd like to kind of demonstrate that with Tad by doing a fast song instead of another slow blues. We'll be doing plenty of slow blues. I will tell you that Muddy Waters said, if I had my choice, I'd play only slow blues because that's where all the soul is. But you got to play for the dancers too, and people want a little up music, and they don't want to cry after every song. I'm going to do a song by one of my favorite songwriters, him. And we recorded this together on an album in about 1999. And he played harp on it, but I want to show you how the two guitars go together while you're still remembering that you're not going to tell Bob Cortor I had another harp player up here. This is a song about drinking, and it may kind of come out on a politically incorrect side of that issue, but the song is called Slam Down, and let's get it for him.
church, yeah, I go to town, and I slam 'em down. I slam 'em down. I know just what I'm doing when I slam 'em down. What happened to you, man?
I went out last night with some of my friends. Went some whiskey, washed it down with gin, and I was slamming down. Slamming them down. I know what I'm doing, baby, when I'm slamming them down.
Lighting off and stuff right here. This part's a little more modern. It's like Robert Lockwood Jr. and Luther Tucker. That's without even a harp player on the stage. Kind of like boom, boom, out go the lights. Well, know me at the whiskey store. I'm right there waiting when they open the door, and I slam 'em down. I slam 'em down. I hope I know what I'm doing when I slam 'em down. You feeling good?
Well, that made me feeling good, that made me feeling bad. That all depends on how much I've had when I'm slamming them down. Slamming them down. You're feeling bad, baby, just try slamming them down.
Go down to Antone's on the first night that we played there. And opening up on the first night was the Fabulous Thunderbirds with Jimmy Vaughn in the band and Kim Wilson singing and playing harp and Luann Barton singing. And I said to our harmonica player who came down early with me, I said, you know, we get a lot of bands that open for money that aren't really very good, but sooner or later we're going to find one that just kicks ass. And I listened to them for about a minute and I said, Jerry, that's it. That's it. That's the band I was talking about. Jerry goes, it took him at least another whole minute to go, yeah, that's it. And you heard Jimmy Vaughn playing and Kim Wilson and all them. And so we were doing, the Thunderbirds would open, Muddy would play a set, the Thunderbirds would play another set, and then Muddy would play another set. On that third set where the Thunderbirds were, I was sitting at a table watching, and a young man who's about 20 years old that was really, really obnoxicated came up to me and he said, his eyes looked like this, "My brother kicked your ass." And that was Stevie. And I said to him, I like him very much too. I'm really enjoying listening to him. He's a wonderful guitar player. And then the next night, Stevie was playing with a band called the Cobras there. And we used to do 5 nights in one place, and everybody would get to be really good friends over those 5 nights instead of just one night here or there. And every time I saw Stevie after that, which was the 7 years before he became famous and put out that Texas Flood album, every time I saw him somewhere, he would apologize to me for that introduction. And I kept saying, no, you're right, he's great, I love Jimmy. And we all do, don't we? Both of them, too. And I said, Muddy, really? Not Chess? And he said, yeah, Chess Records has been sold to a corporation, and there's nobody from the Chess family involved in it anymore, and I don't feel the loyalty that I always felt to Chess Records, because while I might have made another thing he said about Chess is, I made them millionaires, but they made me a name. And that was important to Muddy. He wanted to be, his own words, not famous, but he'd say a known person. And that made him feel good. When Can't Be Satisfied came out in 1949, which I came out in 1949 as well. And when that came out, Muddy said he could drive up and down the streets of Chicago and hear his song. It was an instant hit record. They pressed 3,000 and sold out in a couple of days. And he said he could hear it coming out of the windows of people's houses, and he could hear it on the jukeboxes and bars, and it made him feel good. Now, he also was a great musician and needed to be recognized for it, and by that time, Muddy, born in 1915, was already in his 30s when he got well known. So any of you that are young and don't get to be as famous as Kingfish while you're young, don't feel bad. If you got it, it's going to come out, and the world won't be able to deny it. Now, I had, Johnny Winter was a young prodigy in Texas in the late 60s, and he was discovered and had an album out on Columbia Records, which was well promoted, and he played traditional blues on it. He got some of his favorite older blues people on it, like Willie Dixon and Big Walter Horton. And when it came time for Johnny to have the opportunity with his manager had set up a record label for him to record Muddy, Johnny already knew a lot about deep blues and the music that he loved, and he wanted to make that kind of album for Muddy. And what he did is he took us into a studio in Connecticut called the Schoolhouse, because it had been an old schoolhouse. The room was about the size of this part of this room, just behind you. You're on the border, and it was about that big. And we all set up fairly close to each other with very minimal baffling between the amplifiers and everything. Muddy didn't use headphones. He had a tiny little Princeton amp in front of him, tilted up towards him like a monitor speaker, and he could just barely hear his own voice coming through that, but he sang loud. And everything was recorded in the room at the same time. Johnny Winter did a studio technique that a lot of people do, which is to put a couple of microphones up near the ceiling and get the sound of the whole room together, and you could add as much of this room sound as you want. And Johnny, when he was mixing the record, very deliberately used those mics a lot more than most people do, not to add a little of reverb or room sound, but just to make it sound like you were in the room with that schoolhouse, that big wooden room about this size, with the band, and that you could hear that they left on enough of the beginnings and endings of the songs so you could hear what a good time we were having recording that. Muddy brought me and Pinetop Perkins and Willie Big Eye Smith, the drummer, from his own band. I've had those people on this stage in here. They all passed around 2011. But I've had them in here to play for people at the Rum Boogie during our showcases. And those albums are famous not just for the good music on them and the songs that Muddy did and the fact that they revitalized his career, but the sound of those albums was very important, and that was very deliberate on Johnny Winter's part. People ask me, what was he like? Because he's such a force of nature, guitar player and singer. He truly was that. He had that talent, and he was like that from the time he was young. But he wanted to apply that to producing, too, and I have to give him a lot of credit for very, very deliberately making those albums sound like a band in a room having a good time playing blues. Is that the sound that you're looking for? I don't know if I can't really demonstrate it up here except to maybe play Can't Be Satisfied or something when we close it. And Tad will play a second guitar part along with it. Muddy did not pick up his guitar on the Hard Again album. We put it out there for him. It was sitting right next to him in the studio, and basically Johnny Winter and I played all the guitar parts on that. And Johnny Winter played Can't Be Satisfied his own way, and I played a second guitar part behind it, which I'm not going to tell Tad about because I'm going to let him do it his own way. He's a great guitar player, don't you think, Tad Walters?
Yes.
And they had, this album became a real classic, and there's a lot of people of a certain age for that's what got them deep into blues. Would that be you, sir? Okay, well, you might want to check out this album. It's called Hard Again. Now, that might sound dirty when I say it. And Muddy was probably 12 years younger than me when he made that album. Younger than I am now. Muddy lived to the age of 68. He made that album a few years before that. He passed in 1983, and I miss him every day, but I feel him all around me, and especially in a blues place with blues lovers. So I'm going to tune this up to open G and play Can't Be Satisfied for you. And I'm going to tell you how I learned to play it just before I start to. So you play this on the guitar. By the way, if you're trying to watch what Tad's playing, he's got his guitar tuned down a whole half step. So don't let anything fool you there. He just likes to play it that way, and if I tell him something's in the key of E, he never plays it in the wrong key. He's a smart guy. And he knows how to do that well. What I'm doing is tuning this. Do you know what open G tuning is? Probably a lot of you do. It's you leave these three strings in the middle down, and take the A string and tune it down to a G. Boy, it sure is a lot easier with these little things, but Elvis never would have used one. They don't look cool, do they? And then, and something Muddy taught me, he said, always tune up to the note rather than bring it down to the note, because it'll go out of tune again if you do that. Let's see if I can get this just right, but coming up to the note. Open tuning. and now reach in my pocket for the magic slide. By the way, Muddy used to use one that just fit on the tip of his pinky and would only cover three strings at a time. He couldn't go and hit all those notes at the same time, nor did he want to. He simplified everything. He kind of deconstructed the even more complex blues that he learned from Son House and Robert Johnson to a simpler style that was his own. And it was simple and very, very powerful. And so I kind of had Muddy scoped out. He really enjoyed that I was trying to learn from him. And I stayed at his house a few times, and I would sometimes play cassette tapes of his old songs, and he would, after a while, come in the room and tell me stories about the sessions or point out things to me within the music. And one time I was sitting there with an unplugged Stratocaster, maybe 50, 60 feet away from him in the kitchen drinking champagne, and I started to play Can't Be Satisfied, and I hear from the kitchen, "Run!" And he came in the room and stared at me. And I said, "Well, Muddy, I'm sure it is. You know, it's one of my favorite songs. You played that so great." And he says, "Yeah, that's the song that put me on the road." And I said, "Well, why don't you show me how to play it?" Nope. But he sang what I was doing wrong. He told me that little thing about cut the notes off quick by putting your kind of clamping down. Like, yeah, instead of. I mean, he played everything like he was kind of angry. As a matter of fact, if he made a mistake on the guitar, he looked at the guitar like it betrayed him. He'd go like that. It was still a mistake, but I wouldn't say that to his face. But I kept playing it till he couldn't say wrong anymore. Now, I may mess it up right now, but we'll see. And Ted, you play whatever you feel. Satisfied, and I just can't keep from crying. Well, I know my little baby, she gon' take the show. Battle trading that boys, and I come walking out where I'm through. All one night. And I just can't be satisfied, and I just can't keep from crying. I'll play one more for you, 'cause it's the same every time. Thank you very much. I tried not to embellish it very much and keep it very close to the way Muddy does it. When I play on my own gigs, I don't try to play what he played literally unless there's somebody has asked me to do that. And in this situation of being a workshop, I want to do the best I can for you to say if Muddy Waters were here to tell you the things he told me and show you the things he showed me, I want to give them to you now. They're certainly not mine, and a lot of them weren't his. Believe me, he learned a lot from Son House and Robert Johnson. He'd be the first one to tell you that. But I hope you enjoyed that part. We are getting close. No, actually, it is the end. But before Bob Cortor gets here with a harmonica amp, does anybody have anything else they would like to ask about? First him, then you, okay? By the way, I don't know where, there seems to be radio in my monitor, which is weird. But what were you going to say down here, sir? So somebody was going to ask something.
Bob, I'm upstairs. I wanted to ask if you're playing slide guitar.
Whoa! I didn't even remember there was people up there. Wow.
Having a separate guitar for playing slide, or set your action real high, or just the same action you always use?
This is a great question. Do I have a different guitar for playing slide? And there's a lot of people that do, but I don't. Muddy Waters had a Telecaster at the time I was in the band, and that was his main guitar from when he got it in 1957. I believe it was in 1956. In 1961, he had a new neck put on it, and Fender used to make wider necks back then if you special ordered them. And Muddy Waters, who you think of as a force of nature, wanted one. He knew a lot more about the technical side of amplifiers and guitars and electric guitars than you would expect. Muddy ordered this little wider neck because he had very big hands, neck that was a little wider, not little wider neck. And the strings that he used, which he asked me to buy, were 56, 44, 32. The high string was a 12 and a 16. And instead of using the wound string, these were called Gibson medium gauge strings, and they were metal, but they were for acoustic guitars. And he didn't use the wound G string. He got a 22 playing. So I started buying the same kind for myself and using them because they sounded so good, especially when you play the lower notes. There'd be this fullness to it that there wouldn't be on slinky strings, which had not been invented till about 10 years later. So he used heavy strings and he played everything on one guitar, except he had higher action than I have on this one. This is higher than most people would want to play it if you ever look at it closely. And I just got used to it over the years. I don't think my hands were as strong as Muddy's hands, but I got used to it, and now that's what I do. If I want to bend a note like B.B. King, I just do it and do it with brute force, even though that's the opposite of the way he did it. B.B. used to love to use light strings. Says, why should you have the guitar fight you? And he had somebody to change his strings on every gig, not me. These I get 6 months out of these, and sometimes they just don't go out of tune at all. Muddy's guitar, one time I was taking care of it and setting it up every night. One night, I take it out of the case and put it on the stage, and I noticed that it was still in tune at the end of the night after him really pounding on it very hard. And he would use a thumb pick and one metal finger pick. I just use finger and thumb. I wouldn't use the thumb pick, as Tad doesn't use any right here. I wanted to do that. I wanted to learn to do that like some great guitar players like Hubert Sumlin did, of just use my fingers. And the first time I tried it, we were on a tour in Australia, and I said, okay, I'm just going to put the pick down and tough it out. And I tore half of my thumbnail off, blood on the strings and everything. And so I had to use a thumb pick after that, and I kind of got to like it. And that is the way Muddy did it, but he doesn't anymore, but you can. But really good question about the setup of the guitar. From La Balcony. And I wasn't even looking up. Now, since Mr. Couture isn't here yet, what were you going to say?
When you guys play those shows with three guitars and bass, did you guys sit down with fuzz?
Excuse me. Is there some way to turn the radio off in the...
We can't. I'm sorry, it's just inherent. 85 powers.
Because that's driving me batshit crazy while I'm trying to talk with the radio in my face.
Yeah, with those shows where you have three guitar players, you got fuzz on the bass, did you guys sit down with him, arrange, like, one guy's playing the bass line, the other guy's playing like fills and stuff. Did whoever played, who was playing the bass line, did they sit with fuzz and kind of arrange that, or did they play something different?
This is another fantastic question. Muddy had three guitars on the stage. He didn't always play himself, but when he chose to, there'd be three guitars up there, a bass player, and don't forget the left hand of the piano.
Thank you.
All playing in that same lower register. And everybody had to... I don't think they did this consciously. I had to learn to very quickly, but everybody had to try and play something that the other people weren't playing. Don't step on the piano line. Everybody wants to hear that wonderful Pine Top Perkins play his left hand too. Hi Nick, how you doing?
Hi, man.
Good to see you. How was the harp class?
It was all right.
Is Bob coming over?
I think so.
Good.
I have a question.
Yeah, just a second on this one. We were talking about how three guitars in a blues band and a piano and a bass player all playing on the bass lines. It would either be, the answer would be either play very sparsely or listen to the other ones and play something that they weren't playing. Like play the same line inside out or backwards. And then they would kind of harmonize and go with each other. It was some pretty tricky stuff, but with a large band, it was very powerful. It had a low end. You saw like what happened with just Tad playing the low line behind me playing a high one sometimes. It gets much more complex when there's a lot of people up there. That was a great question, incidentally. And the best thing I would do is to recommend listen to the records. And some of them, especially the ones from when I was in the band, I got to produce the reissues of some of those Blue Sky albums. That was the name of the record label that Johnny Winter had. And I got to produce reissues of Hard Again, and I'm Ready, and Muddy Mississippi Waters Live, and an album called King Bee that he did. And on one of them, it had Muddy. They had come up with some tapes in the early 2000s that were about to be thrown out. That was multi-track tapes of Muddy in a nightclub with his own band, and they wanted to make that a second album that would go with the Grammy, but not Blues Grammy, winning Muddy Mississippi Waters Live album. And we, God, that shit's driving me nuts. It's like somebody talking in my face while I'm doing it. I'm trying to listen to it. On this particular second album that was added to the Legacy, Sony Legacy version of Muddy Mississippi Waters Live, it's Muddy in a Club. And I was able to mix this one as well as produce it. And I tried to make it, put everybody in their place where they were standing. And you can hear the piano over, if you were facing it, over on the left side, then me, then Muddy. Calvin Jones, the bass player, would be up the middle, right near the drums. And Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson would be on the far side. And you could hear what each person was playing. We didn't all just play bass lines. Somebody would play lead, somebody would do chords that were in the mid-range, but they all went together, they wove. Nobody just stood there strumming chords, and nobody just played lead and fills like, say, B.B. King chose to do. Can't criticize B.B. for that, but it was his choice. He wanted to do it that way. Well, I think Bob Cortor is going to be here in a minute, unless he's. If he doesn't, I might make somebody else play harp till he comes. Well, why don't we all? I know this young man that just walked in. Yeah. Don't tell Bob, but Tad already played a song on harp at the beginning when Bob would never find out. But this young man that just walked in from Colorado, I've known him for about 50 or 60 years, or I feel like it. His name is Nick Clark, and he's an incredible harmonica player. And he's sitting right next to my friend Alfonso right here, who I met through the Pine Top Perkins Foundation workshops. Why don't you give them a nice round of applause, because I like them a lot. Well, Nick has something to tell us. Would you like to share that with the
I
class?
have a question.
Beginner's luck.
It's not for you though. Tad, will you play Melton at some point this week? The song Melton? At some point?
Yeah, I guess I can pull that.
Yeah!
What's the one?
At some point.
Oh, that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Let me tune back up to the regular tuning. Are you playing on the guitar or harp?
You want me to get these out of your mind?
Playing on. You wanted to hear him play it on harp?
I just want to hear him sing it.
Oh, okay, good. Let me tune up. This is a song called "Waiting for Bob Cortor to Set Up," and Tad Walters is going to sing this. And by the way, this gentleman was just conducting the harmonica class in the other room. He's one of the finest harmonica players I know, and he knows how to tell you what he's doing too. This is Bob Cortor, and if this, are you setting up on that side now, or?
Wherever this now, looks like that.
Yeah, Tad's using that, but he'll be ready in the side after this. Oh, take it away, Maestro.
Yeah!
Hey, pretty mama, walked in your town. Well, look at you, I got to hang around because I'm melting over you. Because I'm melting over you. I'm so doggone hot, that stuff that you got, I'm melting over you. Well, now you're wearing that dress and I can see your legs. Please, pretty mama, don't you make me your way because I'm melting over you. Lord, I'm melting over you. I'm so doggone hot about that stuff that you got. I'm melting over you. Yeah, man, play. Call that Dr. Baby, been killing more me. You got my temperature about 103. Now I'm melting over you. I'm melting over you. I'm so doggone hot, baby, like that stuff that you got. I'm melting. doggone hot, baby, about that stuff that you got. I'm melting.
Thank you. Yeah. That's Tad Walters playing the guitar and singing for you one of his own songs right there. I thought that was rather romantic. As cynical as I know he is sometimes. Tad, thank you so much for coming by and texting me, and I said, "Dude, can you bring a guitar?" And boy, I'm glad he did. I think he added a lot to our workshop where we were talking quite a bit about how to collaborate with somebody, as well as answering the questions about setup and me being able to tell you the stories of the lessons that Muddy Waters taught to me. We've still got the we still got radio coming through the monitors. It used to be taxis in the 90s, I think. But I'm going to take my coat off the monitors, and hopefully we'll talk and play loud enough to be able to do it. But how many of you were over in Bob's class just now, the harmonica class? He had a guitar in that right before you did. That's how you know when a harmonica player is on stage. The first thing that happens is feedback. Sometimes, if somebody's playing their own stuff, they on their own equipment. But here, we're all just plugging into whatever's on stage, and it may be set funny and you don't notice it. And it's not funny, it kind of squeals. I'm going to try and take my jacket off the monitor speaker. There's actually radio coming through the monitors.
Right,
There's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, I know. We're on your side. Thank you for doing such a good job for us today. But, Bob, would you like to talk about the harmonica style and how it goes with the guitar, and then we can demonstrate something, and I'll try and play the part that you want. You want me to move over here? Or you use
yes, Mike. First off, how about it for Bob Margolin? When it comes to playing the old style, he is just the expert of experts, and we just got through playing a full week in Switzerland at this wonderful jazz club, and just as a duo, and we just had the best time playing all those cool tones and grooves and whatnot. It was really a great time. Thank you very much for that week, Bob. And but the guitar and the harmonica are just a matching sets. As a matter of fact, harmonica by itself, you can do some stuff all by itself on the harmonica, but without a guitar, it just doesn't seem to work. Now, sometimes I've seen harmonica and piano, or harmonica and mandolin, or things like that, and that works, but there's something really special about a guitar, and I think part of it is that the open tuning for a guitar in E gives a lot of different harmonies that are really beautiful on the guitar. And they kind of ring in a certain way that harmonizes, and the harmonica does the same thing. It harmonizes in a very cool way. So for that reason, I think that really works, and that was kind of the basis of the sound of Chicago blues in the early days. Some of those Maxwell Street records on Ornell, Lou Walter's earliest records, and Jimmy Rogers' earliest records, they were all just guitar and harmonica. And from there, of course, Muddy Waters recorded things just as guitar, and then added harmonica and bass to them, and eventually became a full band. But God bless the guitar if you're a harmonica player.
I would like to add that I am just ancient enough to have caught a lot of the great guitar players that were known for backing harmonica players. That would be Muddy Waters and Jimmy Rogers. It would be the brothers Lewis and Dave Myers. It would be,
Robert Lockwood Jr. and Luther Tucker together. People like that. I got to be friends with all of them and learn from all of them and ask them questions. And they were all very, very nice about sharing their information with me and giving me tips. Muddy was the one who was always glad to tell me when I was wrong, though. And I learned from it, and I try to learn real fast and not make the same mistake twice. But I'd like to use what I learned from those people to back up Bob well on whatever kind of song you want, with or without a vocal. You could do a harmonica instrumental that if you want, that and I will try and get behind you on it. It's up to you. You call it.
You know, I'd like to just do a Muddy Waters slow blues because I've been itching to do that all week. I haven't had a chance yet to do that.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to do a Muddy Waters style slow blues. It's not a song that Muddy wrote, but I wrote this song, and it came from a story that I heard Muddy tell one night when the band had been on the road in Europe for weeks and weeks and maybe even months, and we were all very anxious to go home. We were all very homesick. And the older guys in the band, which was all of them, got into a discussion of the most desperate things they had done over women. And I thought I would listen to that. And of course, I was 27 years old or so at the time, and nothing bad had ever happened to me by then. But the other guys told stories, and the one who told the deepest one was Muddy himself, who said that one time he went over to a woman's house that he was seeing, and he could hear from outside the house that she was making sounds with another man that he had never heard her make with him, and how bad he felt. He found himself outside the window in the rain, on his knees with a gun in his hand, praying, "Please don't let me kill this woman." That's not the word he used for her, but that's what he meant. So I said, well, maybe someday I'll write a song about that, and I did. So here it comes, and we'll go to Muddy, and Bob has his own way of playing the stuff. He's a highly developed harmonica player. He would not sound like Alfonso playing harp on it. He wouldn't sound like Nick Clark playing on it. He wouldn't sound like Tad Walters playing on it. He'd sound like Bob Kortzler. I love that sound. What he used to call that mumble in the streets. In the alley by her window, I drop my gun and fall on my knees. In the alley by her window, I drop my gun and fall on my knees. Lord, give me strength. Don't let me kill this woman, please. I just can't shoot her. But someday she'll surely go to hell. I just can't shoot her, but someday she'll surely go to hell.
feel sorry for the devil when he gets to know the world. Oh, you know it too, huh? If you lose your heart's desire, you can't be satisfied. If you lose your heart's desire, you can't be satisfied. No matter how you try. Thank you so much. Now, just educationally, I'll ask you to notice how we didn't step on each other, but we each tried to do parts that would add to each other. If one person was soloing, that was certainly his solo, but the other one would play something that went along with it. He was thinking, how can I enhance this rather than, gee, what am I going to play after this is done? We both working hard together that way without even thinking about it. We've been doing it that way for so long, and we learned it from the old masters that I've been talking about here. You can, once again, if you want to play blues rock and use pedals and play a lot louder, it will be very dramatic, and we all know wonderful players who do that. But if you can throw some of this old school stuff into your own style, make something out of it yourself, find your own way, good for you. You'll
end up being the best musician you can be. Is there anything anybody would like to ask Bob, or should we just play something else for you? So I took this and made it from a rumba the way I recorded it in the 90s into just a straight blues shuffle that features Bob's fine blues harmonica playing. And we'll play it for you right now. It's on my new album called This Guitar and Tonight. And we probably will do the title song from that at some point here too. But this is called Rhythm Room Blues Lover. And as I say, it features Bob's harp and was wrote this song to feature his fine harp playing in the way we try and put it together for you.
In Phoenix, Arizona, a fine lady's getting dressed. She's going out to the rhythm room to hear the sounds that she loves best. She loves her life blues. She confessed that she is obsessed. She's going out all alone to check out a new blues band. Her girlfriends won't go with her. No, they just don't understand. That's alright, she don't need them. She just gets all the blues she can. Go get it, man. There's a harp in this guitar. She knows it's slow and deep, and she feels it in her heart. She says, hush, I'm trying to listen when men hit on her at the bar. Can still be blue for sure. She loves all and deep, and she feels it in her heart. And if blues is her sadness, then blues music is her cure. Let's go back to Phoenix.